Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Terry Flynn. I'm the director of the MCM program at McMaster University, and so very pleased to have everybody here attending. We had over 315 people register for tonight's session, and we're pretty excited, pretty nervous, pretty anxious about it. We spent the last 2 days trying to find the right platform that will help us deliver this in a way that is beneficial for everybody. We started this thinking about EDIB in the summer when a number of my graduate students, alumni, came to us and said, "How are we addressing this? How are we addressing this issue? This is an important issue, and we need to have a conversation in our industry about that." And so one of the recommendations was to, in fact, use a weekly podcast, video cast that we had developed called Tuesday Talks to do that. And over a 6-week period, we explored issues of anti-racism, Black representation in Canada, the United States, issues of diversity, Indigenous issues, and how organizations can structure issues to be able to have these kind of conversations. And it was very beneficial and very enlightening and very useful for all those that presented and participated. In the fall, we said, how do we go from there? Enough of the talking, enough about the presenting. Where do we have this? Where do we take this conversation next? And 4 or 5 of us started to meet on weekends to say, we need to create a dialogue that leads to a summit where we have actionable items that organizations can take on. And so that's where we are tonight. Obviously, there is a great thirst and a great need to have this conversation. I want to thank our little organizing crew, including Gail Strawn, Charlene Carrington, Sarah Goldvine, Parm Chauhan, for the work that they did over the last little while. I also want to thank Sarah Thomas, who joined the team last week, to be able to give a perspective that is important, an Indigenous First Nations perspective on this very important subject as well. So one thing I would ask is that we have this conversation in a very inclusive, collaborative, and a listening way. We are going to monitor chat and monitor conversation. And if we believe that people are not being respectful to one another, or not listening, or trying to, or they have an alternative agenda, then we're going to take the opportunity to disinvite you and ask. Well, we're not going to ask you to leave. We're just going to have you leave. And so that's what our job is to do. My job now is to turn it over to Sarah Thomas. And Sarah, I ask you to set our intentions for today's session.
Thank you very much, Terry. I really appreciate that warm welcome, and I'm happy to be a part of this group with everyone here today. First and foremost, I'd like to thank all of you for joining this event today. I'm coming to you guys from the traditional territory of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation here in North Vancouver. I always like to set the tone of the meeting, acknowledging the land that I am coming to you from, acknowledging the traditional landowners of the land that we gather here today on. Now, normally we would be doing this in person, but because of this pandemic we're in, each of you guys are coming from across Canada. So that's really important that we go back to acknowledging the land of the Indigenous people that have been here for thousands of years. I just want to remind everyone that this is a tough dialogue to have for some people, and we're all coming together here with different backgrounds, different intentions of being here. And I just want to remind you to come to the table with an open heart, an open mind. This is a safe space for all of you guys to share, to ask questions, to understand, because this is how we're going to make change, by listening to each other and listening to each other with good intentions that we want to make this a better world for our future generations, for all of us Canadians, all of us public relations professionals, all of us communicators. So with that, I'd just like to remind you guys again that this is a safe space and we're all here to listen and learn together. I'd like to pass it over to Gail now to talk a little bit more about what today's agenda is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Terry, for the welcome. The work is meaningful. The work is passionate. And I think that's what's been driving us. Change is important. And to everything Sarah just said, a quote that I looked up the other day from James Baldwin, very renowned in the US for his eloquence in dialogue, his directedness. And I think one of the clearest things he said was, we can agree and still love each other. We can disagree and still love each other. Anti-racism requires a hard look in the mirror, personally and professionally. You cannot look in the mirror to want to change anti-racism and be a part of anti-racism change and not take a look at yourself personally. So that this is in the boardroom, it's on the street, it's in the corporate offices, it's at the table. The table could be round in your home, it could be a square or rectangular boardroom in your office, or it could be on Zoom as we are in now. But the point is, it's a hard conversation to have, and it's encouraging to see so many of us here today. It's encouraging to see so many people put their hand up and say, I want to be part of the change in the narrative. The narrative that has for too long had one perspective. Not in some cases because of history, yes. In other cases because of fear. We are communicators, we're storytellers. We've come from a tradition, BIPOC, of storytelling. So let's tell each other's story. And as communicators, the integrated profession of communications is responsible for that. We're responsible for seeking the truth, challenging misinformation, ensuring that facts are being used to spread dialogue and encourage dialogue. Discourse is okay. My after-school activity when I was growing up was to be part of the debate club. The debate club showed you how to disagree very eloquently and respectfully with those that you have a disagreement with, because you learn from each other. You bring arguments to, you bring arguments against. And in that exchange, we both learn from each other. This is what we're here today to do, to ensure as communicators who are responsible for the narrative that's on the street now, let's make a change. Let's bring in the voices that have not been heard as much. Let's bring in the perspectives that we need to hear more from. Let's learn from the experiences as well as the talents and skills and abilities that we all have and find some solutions. What I appreciate about this conversation tonight, most specifically, is it's not about the pain of why we are here, but it's about what you're missing as to why we are not here. This is what's given me hope and encouragement with Terry's leadership, that we are moving from not just reflection about all the darkness of the past and the history and why it wasn't, and how victims are perceived in the media and how conversations. We're here about being aware now that we need to change. We're here because we all have a desire to change, to support and be a part of that. We are building our knowledge on both sides of the house so that we can be resourced up and skilled up to change. We have the ability, because we are of the talent that we are, we know what we need to do, we know how we need to do it, and we need to reinforce that. We need to make sure that this change in 2020 is going to continue for futures and futures beyond, for the third, fourth generation of children who were here as immigrants, for the Indigenous population that's been here for thousands of years. We want to make sure that this land reflects everyone. Next slide, please. So we started the dialogue over the summer because I was angry. And I'm going to take James Baldwin. You can't be conscious if you're not angry. So I went to Terry Flynn and I said, look, there's a lot of black squares up there and a lot of conscious celebration of we need to make a change. But what I noticed about that was the change was very surface. It was, we're taking a stand against racism because it's the right thing to do. It was a position statement, none other. We've been all around the block a few times. We know, we've heard. What made 2020 different? So it was about being anti-racist. That was really the coming out. That was people saying, it's more than just saying that racism is a bad thing and we shouldn't do it. It's actually, what are some specific things that we can do to actually combat anti-racism? And while this conversation that I had was specific to anti-Black racism, because over the summer, the rally cry around the world, not just for the people in the United States, but the people in Australia and in Germany and in England, it was that there is something about dark that is causing fear. So specifically, we have to get comfortable talking about anti-Black, anti-BIPOC racism and systemic racism. So when we talk about how color has affected us because of the social construct of race, we know that that social construct of race is on a scale. And the people who are most affected on that scale are those who are darker. So colorism is real in every race, from blonde hair and blue-eyed to dark skin from wherever in the world you're from. So let's get comfortable being uncomfortable and move into the dialogue of why and how change could be in effect. The first change is within our industry itself, and this is where my colleague Charlene will explain what's happening in the state of our profession.
Thank you. What an introduction. So a few years ago, I began a study of public relations, specifically of the representation of Black women in public relations. And, you know, I was sitting in rooms and I was looking around every public relation table I've ever sat at, and I was the only person who stuck out. And, you know, clearly I started to think, is this me or is this actually a problem? And I delved into the study and interviewed 21 women, 21 Black female practitioners, to really understand what their experience was. And I think after doing more research, I really got a better understanding that it's not only Black females' experience, it's very much so a Black experience within public relations. So, you know, what I found through my research was specifically the current industry, actually known as the last of the lily white fields. Mostly PR teams are mostly white women, and yet management leadership is still male and mostly white male. There, of course, is a decline just culturally, not only in public relations, but across the board in the kind of traditional overt racism, but implicit, more subtle forms of racism, of course, are really existing and are actually running rampant based on what we're hearing practitioners say about their experience. And what I heard practitioners in my study say really mirrored what the research said from 30 years ago, that racial and gender barriers are still existing. So in my findings specifically, I found PR is not inclusive, unfortunately. Black practitioners are still facing these barriers like pigeonholing and tokenism, motherhood, which really speaks to the intersectionality piece of being both a woman and both being a woman of color. Racism, unconscious and conscious bias are still impacting their experience in the field. This idea of having to be held to a higher standard and really having to change and alter the way they behave, the way they dress, code switch in order to survive in this kind of environment among the dominant mainstream culture. The conclusions of my study basically showed that, you know, the reputation of PR is still very narrow. It's still seen as very one way with one type of person, ideal person leading it, white female specifically. That gender and racial barriers still exist. And then of course, across the board, every study I did and every participant I spoke to said the same thing: diversity is critical for the effectiveness of our field. So it brought me to, what does that mean for us? What do we do? And I came up with 3 key recommendations. One being that Black practitioners really need to find a way to push forward, to be visible and to be their authentic selves as they're being visible, so that we can really inspire a new generation of Black professionals to come into this field, knowing that they are represented. Secondly, that public relations schools and associations really need to figure out a way to amplify Black voices and share the platform so that those voices can be seen and heard. And of course, organizations and leaders have a role to play in creating a safe and inclusive environment where they can really rethink what the internal structures or the internal composition of their organizations are, but create an environment where these conversations can be had. And I move it over to my colleague, who will give us a little bit of a perspective on the Indigenous voice.
Thank you, Shar. So yeah, like I mentioned when we first started this evening together here, that this space is safe for us to talk about. So I'm just going to talk to you guys really briefly about my story and where I come from and how I got into this profession. I've been in communications now for about 13 years. What you'll know is that Indigenous communities, they all have a communications department. They'll all have a communications person. But what I realized 13 years ago is that these people are non-Indigenous. They're not from the community, or they're consultants that are doing the work for the First Nations here in Canada, including my nation. We had a consultant doing the work for us. And while they may be able to do the communications work for the community, but what they're missing is the background, the knowledge, the traditional knowledge of the community, and to be able to tell the story, the truth about our community in the eyes that we see it as an Indigenous person, as a Tsleil-Waututh person. That needs to come from the heart. That needs to come from our experiences that we have lived in our community. And right now, the stories that I read about the Mi'kmaq people and the fisheries, I don't read the mainstream media. I'm reading the stories from the people themselves. I want to hear it from their eyes. That's the heart and the truth of their stories, of what they're telling, what they're talking about. Sure, we hear what the media is telling us, but that's not the truth. That's not their story. That's not how they feel. And we've seen this too much in the media of portraying Indigenous people in so many different ways. And it's not the story that we want told about us. It's not the story of who we really are. So again, I welcome you guys to ask questions, don't be afraid to ask questions to Indigenous people if you want to know something. I've had people in the last little while asking me even just about the terms of how it's gone from Indian to Aboriginal and now to Indigenous. And people ask me, well, what do you want to be called? You know, and it's not about what I want to be called. It's about who we are as Indigenous people. I'm a proud Tsleil-Waututh woman who is part of the Indigenous community of Canada. And that's who we are. We all have the same connections to the land as Indigenous people. And that's why the term is so important to Canadians here. In the work that I'm doing right now, I'm working to incorporate the traditional knowledge from Indigenous communities across Canada into marine shipping, into part of what their traditional territory is, and the communities that are affected by industries and organizations. And I think that's really important, again, to remember to include Indigenous people from the beginning, not halfway through the research project or halfway through the project that's happening. You want to include them right from the beginning. And once you start including the traditional knowledge, the story and the project becomes a lot deeper into the connection of what's going on. So yeah, again, I just encourage you guys to get to know Indigenous people. It's about bringing cultural awareness to your organizations, to your lives, to everything here. So with that, I'd like to pass it on over to, is it going, Parm?
That's me.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, folks. My name is Parm Chauhan. I had the pleasure of being in the MCM program 2014 to 2016. And for my master's capstone project, the research that I wanted to do was tackle diversity and inclusion, but from a business perspective. Right now, We know that D&I is important and extremely necessary from a human rights, social justice point of view. But I wanted to build a business case for D&I, and there's a reason for that. For corporate Canada, maybe they weren't. I don't know about now. They probably are getting it now, but maybe they weren't getting it from the human rights, social justice perspective. But they'll surely get it from a business perspective. Because if they're leaving profits on the table, that's what corporate Canada is also about. Not entirely, but also, right? So I wanted to explore the connection and impact between, well, the connection and the impact that D&I has on communications, corporate reputation, and then corporate social responsibility. And from that research, I was able to create two business-related definitions of diversity and inclusion. So that is, diversity is a representation of the mix of explicit and implicit differences among a group of people, mainly the workforce, that reflects the community being served or which an organization operates in, which can then bring forward diversity of thought. That's the key, right? And then inclusion is how to ensure that mix of unique individuals feel accepted, respected, and treated fairly to work side by side so that diversity of thought can be harnessed to achieve business goals. So that essentially means diversity is the what, and then the inclusion is the how. Now, why does D&I matter? And what's the connection to practitioner diversity? So again, from a business perspective, let's think about it. Immigration has increased in Canada considerably over the last 10 plus years, right? So the research I did in 2016, there had been in and around, if not over 200,000 new immigrants every year to Canada for the previous 10 years. And most were typically coming from places like Asia, Africa, Middle East, the UK, Europe, and more females were emigrating than males over that 10-year period. So now increased immigration means more people of diverse backgrounds reading your messages, engaging with your staff, buying your services and products. So the messaging itself needs to be inclusive, strategy needs to be inclusive where it can be for the majority to understand, right? Increased immigration also means more disposable income that these immigrants have that can then be spent on your company's products and services. So your audiences, our audiences, they'll speak with their dollars. And if they don't like what you're putting out, you'll find out, and it's too late when you see those profit margins to try and do something about it in a timely fashion, right? So increased immigration also means new and diverse workforce. And all of that puts so much more importance and emphasis on D&I, communication strategy, relationship building, messaging, HR, recruiting practices, everything, right? So for communications to be able to support that growing function of D&I, or even for if communications is engaging with diverse audiences, it itself needs to be diverse. So that's why practitioner diversity is key. And one of the interview participants that I was able to connect with summed it up in just a few short words. To serve the community, you have to hire the community. That's it, right? Now, when we come to the state of corporate Canada, through these interviews, I was able to discover that, corporate Canada is doing one of three things. Either they're doing some or extensive work on D&I, they're doing nothing at all, or they're faking it and making it seem like they're doing something, right? For those organizations, it's often smart communication that's able to cover up that fact. So as communicators, we also have to make sure that we're talking appropriately, we're being ethical, we're being honest with our stakeholders and holding business groups and colleagues responsible is okay, so that we can deliver authentic messaging, right? We have a duty to be the conscience of our organizations. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Sarah, who will talk about an equity lens.
Thank you for that, Parm, and Sarah and Charlene and Gail for sharing your perspectives as well. So hi, my name is Sarah Goldvine. I use that pronoun she, her, and I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish First Nations out here in British Columbia. So I wanted just to share some of my perspectives as a white cisgendered woman in this profession. There's a lot of you that also look a lot like me. And I think that it's really important that all of us are part of this conversation. Ultimately, it's white people that created white supremacy. And so we all need to do our part in dismantling these systems, starting by listening. So I worked much of my career in with organizations where I've had the opportunity to work with communities and people who are experiencing firsthand the results of systemic oppression. And a lot of that, through that career, it's really been a real learning experience for me in terms of understanding how I can be a better ally for communities that are experiencing systemic racism and systemic oppression and colonialism, in terms of driving ultimately systemic change. So I like lists. People who know me know I like lists. So I wanted just to share a few of the lessons that I personally have learned, and come to that from a position really of humility and of lifelong learning. So I would say really my first the first lesson that I've embraced is the importance of choosing to be part of this conversation. For the 128 of you who are here right now, you have already made that choice because you're here. And part of making that choice is also becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. Some of us have a lot of privilege and have the choice of choosing to not be uncomfortable. And I think that a really important part of applying an equity lens to our work is starting to really be uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, and realizing that a lot of us have as part of our learning journey, we're going to have to really unlearn a lot of things. And learning and growth is hard work, and it's really, really rewarding. It's also not necessarily easy. So I would say that that's a really, really important first step. From there, I think it's really, really important to identify and interrupt bias, particularly your own bias. So for those of you that haven't done this yet, it's really, really important to take some time to learn what your own internalized biases are, and to understand that those change over time. And it's not necessarily anything right or wrong, as long as you're identifying and interrupting those biases. So some people can get delivered this training through their workplace or through their school. You can take Harvard implicit assumptions test online. It's one step really to first identify what your biases are. You need to move on from that though, to take the meaningful steps to actually interrupt those biases. So I would say that the third lesson to share, and really building on what Charlene and Parm were touching on there, is the importance of building equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging into your team. This absolutely means hiring different people and taking a look at what your recruitment pipeline looks like. It also though means changing your practices and thinking about how you create an inclusive space once people have joined your team. I know that not everybody has the opportunity to hire. So I would also say, there's lots of ways of building inclusion and belonging into your team. And I would encourage everybody to think broadly about how you define who your team is. It's not only the people that you hire or that you work with, it's the voices that you listen to. So I've, for example, had the opportunity to learn from some really fantastic folks who are joining me on the call today. And I've learned a lot about the impacts of systemic racism on their careers by jumping in and becoming part of their team in informal. It's not part of my work team. It's part of my professional learning team. So I would say that's really, really important. The fourth lesson that I've taken away is the importance of tapping into your power. We all have power. I have a lot of power as a white cisgendered woman who's part of the C-suite. I have a lot of power. Everybody has some type of power. So I think it's really important to identify what your power is so that you can actually access that power to drive systemic change. Because ultimately, most of us joined communications because we want to, and public relations, because we want to make a difference in our community. We want to make a difference in the world. And if you want to make a difference in the world, then you need to, you ultimately need to drive systemic change and figure out where your power is and how you can use that to drive systemic change. And ultimately build the world that we all want to be part of. And then finally, I think it's really important just to recognize that for all of us, this is a continuous learning process, a lot of unlearning about things that we have been taught, and then relearning. So this is it's a continuous process, and I think that I'm just so pleased to be part of this team today and to have so many of you who are part of this learning process. So with that, I think we're going to go to the next slide. And as part of our learning, what we mentioned off the top is that we really want to build towards a national summit next early in the new year. And as part of that, we want to hear from you what you want to learn, right? What would be some tools and tactics and actual actions that would help you advance the change that you want to drive anti-racism as change agents in your organizations, your communities, and in your careers. So shortly, what we're going to do is we're going to send you into breakout groups. We have a number of people that have volunteered to be facilitators. And so that's going to happen shortly. We'll ask you to have some patience while it happens. Before we do that, I'm just going to go over a few guidance, a few things to keep in mind as you have conversations. So when you enter the room, you'll have somebody who's been previously designated to be a facilitator. And we'll also be looking for somebody to volunteer to be a scribe and take notes. Please, if you're in that role, do so without taking names, just capturing themes, no personally identifiable information. For those of you that are entering these conversations, please when you're listening, listen to understand where people are coming from. We're not listening to disagree here. We're listening to understand others' perspectives. And approach the conversation with respect and curiosity. As Sarah Thomas mentioned earlier, like we should be asking questions, and those questions, when you're framing them, frame them from a place of from curiosity, not from a place of accusing people or putting them on their back feet. And please recognize that other people might have experiences that are very different from yours. This one I'm in particular sending out to all of the other white people, and especially the white women in the room. This means, like, just because you haven't seen racism doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Just because you haven't seen ableism or sexism or homophobia or transphobia, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So please do recognize that other people might have experienced that, and be ready to listen. The other thing, of course, should go without saying, but just important to reinforce, please maintain the confidentiality. We've put a lot of thought into trying to create safe space so that people can comment freely. And this means that really, if people are sharing stories about their own experience, take away the lessons, take away the themes, but we would ask that you respect the privacy of people. So that you can actually not mention names outside of the rooms. And finally, and it seems ironic to be saying this after I've been yabbering away for a few minutes, please share the airtime, especially people who have access to more power and probably already have a fair bit of airtime. Please share the airtime. We don't have a lot of time, but we do want to make sure that we're sharing that time with everyone. So shortly, you're going to be sent into your Zoom breakout rooms. We're going to ask that you come back by quarter after. So for those of you in Eastern, that would be 8:15 Eastern time. or for those of us on the West Coast, it's 5:15, you'll be brought back into the plenary, and we'll be asking one person from each group, either the scribe or the facilitator, to share one thing, one idea from the group about what participants would like to hear about, to learn about, to apply, to drive change in their organizations.
Thank you, everyone. I hope your conversations were as fruitful as the conversation in my group. I feel really bad because I feel like at the end we were rushed. We were all trying to get through it, which meant it was a really, really robust and engaging conversation. And I really hope that all of your rooms were robust and engaging as well. I really have to thank all of the scribes in the room, because I'm sure you were all doing this furiously, trying to get all the information down. So, because we weren't all able to be in a group with 300 people and we really wanted to make sure that everyone got a chance to talk, we want to now bring back some of those key findings to the full group here. I'm going to just call on each facilitator, and you guys can call on your scribe or your presenter if it's not you, and just feel free to share one quick theme from the very last question, which essentially was, what do you need from us? What do you need as communicators to be the change agent in your organizations or in your lives? And if you've heard something, if you're on group 15 and you've already heard your point being called or being shared with the rest of the group, feel free to say skip or pass, or you covered it and we're good to go. Okay. So Terry, I'm going to call on you first. So your group and your scribe.
Pass. I was doing technical stuff.
Okay, no problem. No problem. First pass. That's good. That's how we do it. Sarah, number 2. I'm going to call on your group.
Okay. We had a fantastic conversation. I'll share one thing that that came out of it was a real desire for tools and resources for Canadian public relations and communications practitioners to be able to learn more about anti-racism, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
That's amazing. I think that's something we'll probably hear come through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm number 3. Tony, are you on the line? And do you want to share on behalf of our group?
I am. Yeah, I'd love to. Hi, everyone. So we talked about putting together a script that people can use that speaks to what are we doing to support people in the workplace. And similar to what Parm was talking about earlier, we spoke of making a business case and speaking in business terms about the consequences of not having a diverse and inclusive workplace.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think that's relevant for all of us. Number 4, Sarah T. Anyone from your group want to share?
Well, yeah, so just really quickly, I don't think the groups got put in proper grouping order because I wasn't actually a facilitator in my group. I ended up with, I think there was 7 of us in there, but our group got to a lot of discussion, and Liza was actually our facilitator in there, but I'm going to jump in so that we're not saying the last thing at the end. This way we get to speak now. And so what, again, it goes back to the training. Everybody wants to learn more, and we need more training, whether it's written, whether it's videos. So I think as communicators, and we have a lot of great public relations agencies here, that we can all come up with some really good toolkits to provide. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Parm, your group?
Yes. So fortunately or unfortunately, we weren't able to get to that last question because we were just,
That's good, though.
we were deep in there, right? Conversations are coming in hot. Some of the things that stood out was, folks are being brought into organization, BIPOC folks are being brought into organizations, but they seem to be being put and encouraged to go into DEI roles, which really isn't their area of expertise.
Right.
And that also language matters, and to make sure that along with the appropriate language, because as communicators, we use language and visuals to convey our thoughts, language matters and the right visuals matter. So that's very, very important. Now, in terms of the last question, though, other conversations I've had.
Sorry, it's like back in class again, but Parm, you were only allowed to mention one thing.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
But keep your thoughts and add them to the notes, because
Okay.
I'm sure when it's shared around, people will really appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank
Good.
you, Parm. Philip, I'm going to call on you and your group. You're on mute, Phil. You're on mute, Philip. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I remember that class with Parm and Gail and the conversations, good conversations. We had a good conversation. One of the things that was interesting was, and I'm going to, give all laud to Parm for this, is that it quickly became apparent with the four folks in this, in a different range of the sort of industry and areas, was that the senior management was not taking much of a role in dealing with this, and that there was often quite a bit of risk or assumed risk for people to speak out.
Mm-hmm.
And one of our members in this wonderful conversation was a person of color. She was the one in the organization that had to address these issues, had to call out these issues, obviously done with great professionalism. The other thing is interesting, one of our participants teaches in public relations at a college, and said that actually the students were the ones that were driving an understanding about what all of this really means and what needs to happen. So I think there's a kind of an aspect that's probably not just appropriate to educational institutions, but to a number of institutions. So make it your business to talk to the students and get your business together so that it addresses all folks and involves all folks, I guess might be one of the kind of takeaways from this session.
That's great. Thank you. We heard something similar in our conversation as well. Kim, do you have anything from your group you want to add?
Sorry, I wasn't ready with my unmute button, and I have to say I'm so excited by everyone's ideas, and the ideas of my group were amazing. I would invite Josie, who was our scribe, to report if she would like.
Thanks, Kim. I'd be happy to. I will just disclose I was part of that class. So Parm, I will stay to one as well. It was a great class. Okay, I'm going to read our tools. We got through that question. Starter kits, checklists where guidance is provided on where to start the conversations. Tools to help with interactions, educational materials. Human capital is the resource to start with. Advocacy for local societies and chapters. Forums and stories are helpful, and a summit is a great idea. So those are some of the key takeaways we had from our group. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josie.
Okay, so Fernando, can I turn to you and your group?
Absolutely. We had some wonderful conversations, and similar to some of the other groups, there's a desire for workshops, tools, and resources, but those are only meaningful if senior leadership also takes those same workshops. Like Philip said, one of our group participants shared a story about speaking out and that not being well received. So tools, workshops, and the participation of senior leadership.
Perfect. Thank you. Colleen, anything new from your group to share?
We do, and I'm going to ask Kim Blanchette, our scribe, to share. Thanks, and thank you, everyone.
I also was not quick enough with the mute button. Yeah, it was a good conversation. A lot of very, very similar strains. I think to add something a little bit different was we really talked a lot about, recruitment, but representation. And, it's not enough to be well-meaning and recruit. What I have found is, being involved in DEI programs where we do a great job of recruitment, and then we get people in the door and we're like, okay, this is how you behave in here. This is our culture. This is how you work in here, rather than truly leveraging that diversity and helping through diversity, change the culture of the organization. And you know, looking at why do a lot of people, BIPOC candidates leave early on in a tenure, and what is at the root of that? And I think that to us is, you know, it wasn't enough just to go after the recruitment aspect, because if you haven't changed the rest of your organization and you're not open to those diverse experiences, you won't really change the culture.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim. Sarah C., was there anything else new from your group you wanted to add?
No, I think I would just reiterate that we talked a lot about the need for conversation guides and education to help have those tough conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you. Amanda, anything new from your group?
Yes, we talked right to the very end and didn't quite decide who was going to speak here. So Joanna or Rohini, did either one of you guys want to chime in? And feel free to cut me off, but just for the sake of time, a lot of conversation about the discussion guide, but one slant that we kind of talked about was where it doesn't necessarily put the onus on the person having the conversation, and you know, so they're not coming out exhausted at the end. So as part of that, tools to help with that.
Amazing. Thank you. Bree, was there anything new from your group?
Two insights that really jumped out as we tried to kind of get through the whole conversation. One is that we just need to understand and deeply value the lived experiences. They're just as important as any other experiences. We need to open up and listen. We need to better understand the language and how powerful the language is that people need to use. And also the challenge is not simply having the conversation, but getting people to listen and to take action. So no problem in having that conversation, but then what's going to happen?
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bree. Robin, and I know we've already gone through Lisa, so I think we can get through the next two. Robin, anything else from your group?
I think Robin Stewart is me, although I'm not Robin Stewart. It's okay, guys.
Sorry.
That's not an issue. I took over facilitating anyway. Hi, everyone. Hi, Parm. Hi, Kale. The rest of my crew. Sorry. My scribe can jump on now and add what we discussed at the very end of ours as well.
One of our group members mentioned a specific technique that can sometimes make uncomfortable conversations a little bit more approachable. So not calling out, but calling in. So saying, when you hear something that might be hurtful or offensive or racist, saying something like, I used to say that, but then I learned. So when you have the energy to expend on that kind of teaching moment, using that kind of a technique.
Excellent. Thank you. Lisa, we got through your group, I believe. Danica, anything to add that's new for your group?
I don't think there's anything much to add. We talked about the same types of things. So
perfect. Gail, anything to add from your group?
I was so anxious and I forgot the mute button. I know we're running out of time, but data, I threw it in the chat. Data is king. How we use it to benefit the racialized communities that we didn't use it for because we were trying to hide and not show bias. But I think we need to figure out how do we use this data in a positive way that's going to actually benefit the people that we're now trying to help pull more into the organizations and up through the organizations.
Excellent. Thank you. And
IMCM 2016. Sorry, I had to shout out.
And Marissa, anything else for your team?
I didn't end up being a facilitator, but Danica covered everything off.
Okay, perfect.
Sure. We had Rob Esselman, Julie Herzog, and Emma Bowie that were also sudden facilitators. So
okay, thank you for taking up the charge, team. Anything else from your teams?
Hi, it's Julie. So I would jump in and say we had some discussion about, looking to the future and reaching out to, colleges and universities and making sure that there's training and education that's really built into the curriculum, whether it's an undergraduate degree, a postgrad certificate, or a master's course, so that we're ensuring that those practitioners who are coming in are well versed in these conversations and how to approach this when they're going out into the workforce.
Excellent.
Excellent. Perfect. Yeah.
And Emma or Rob?
I think everything was covered from our group, unless anyone from our group has anything to add. We only made it a question 4. We were having a good conversation as well.
Okay, well, thank you for everyone who are facilitators, all the scribes and all the comments. I think Terry's going to share with us a little bit about the next steps.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your participation and your investment of time. Before we do next steps, I want to just give a shout out to Devin, who's working the technical magic, and Yaz is also back there helping Gail. So these are important people that are supporting all of us to make sure that this evening has reached where we are. So I would ask you to fill out the survey that we started. It's important that we get a sense of people's perception. We'll do another survey as well, just to kind of wrap this up. We're going to put together a bit of a readout summary and package this video, the beginning part of it and this last part of it as well. I would ask the scribes to send an email to mcmedib@mcmaster.ca with your notes so that we can collect those notes as well. And then obviously we didn't have enough time. We had 90 minutes. This is a 1,000-year discussion that we tried to have in 30 minutes. So we believe that we need to have another discussion, a continuation of this discussion. And so watch your email. We're going to select a date and we'll create an agenda so that you can participate again. But again, we're up to about 130 people tonight. That was great. I really appreciate everybody's efforts, and I want to thank the organizing group and the facilitators for the time that they spent to do this. And that's it. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Just a moment.
Hold on.
We'll also note again that it was mcmedib@mcmaster.ca if you need to reach us for anything or sending the scribe details.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thanks, Devin. Thanks, Terry.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Have a good night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.